Great. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our second spring session of this extended exploration of altruism. So today, we're picking up a little bit, but I think it's taking a more explicitly philosophical turn. We're picking up on the sort of evolutionary conversation that we were having last time, because there are evolutionary origins or explanations for what looks like altruistic behavior. That I think I like some moves here. Actually, when I was listening to this podcast, if you guys got a chance, I remember some moves is like, yeah, I don't really see why we're talking about evolution this way. And I think that echoes some of the conversation we were having at the end, that like there's not as much explanatory, there's not much of a requirement for an explanation, I think, maybe, or at least according to some of these thinkers, for why altruism is possible. It's just like it's very atypical and so forth. So we might discuss that. But basically, for folks who are listening in or who didn't get a chance to watch the podcast or listen to the podcast, the discussion is centered around these folks who anonymously or not anonymously, they donate kidneys, but they don't have a particular person in mind. So it's not like I'm donating a kidney to my aunt or uncle or their spouse or something like that, but rather they're donating a kidney without any other person in mind, and this is often called altruistic kidney donation. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, the reason it's a starting point for this sort of discussion is that seems like an extremely or supremely altruistic thing to do. You know, there's a difference between it's a calculated or even premeditated decision, I think, relative to like jumping in and saving a child or something, or saving a life. Like in some sense, not to, I don't know if that's true, but I can more easily imagine, I think, jumping in to save someone in the heat of the moment. And I can think about like not backing out all those points you could when I'm deciding to give my kidney to a random stranger. Well, not random, a stranger who has problems with their kidneys. And so the discussion picks up there, and it tries to explore really, well, one, how relevant or how important is an evolutionary explanation for this sort of behavior? But two, what can these sorts of instances, these instances of like sort of extreme altruism, tell us about the nature of altruism or how we should best understand it? I'm going to stop the sort of setup there and just ask if folks had thoughts. I have some prompts and stuff, of course, but if y'all got a chance to listen to the podcast, so anything that came to mind or things that jumped out at you, that sort of stuff. So throwing the floor over to anything either of you might want to chat about.
Yeah, I'll say I did listen. I enjoyed it. I think it was well done. I found myself not believing though that the person, Penny Lane, that she truly could not say that there was a self-interest. Because at the very end of the podcast, they mentioned that she films a documentary about her experience and her role as a career as a filmmaker. So, maybe I could believe that perhaps she did go in it with the best of intentions originally. But I think we were discussing like last week, and it's still the same topic, is like true, pure altruism possible, like where you could genuinely give and sacrifice something without benefit. I don't believe that's true. But I also argue that's unimportant, as much as the effect, like the net positive effect, is so important that someone now um, could have a kidney, for example. So that's kind of my takeaway from the whole time I was like, what is she getting out of this really? What are they going to say? Um, yeah, I think pure altruism is too high a bar, but maybe a bar not worth jumping over.
Yeah. I'm just gonna put this out there maybe for folks who are listening, just because now I'm having that orientation. Pure altruism, I think, Jason, do you have in mind something like doing an activity or doing a benefit for somebody else that has no sort of payoff for oneself, or is that the idea? Just so
Right.
maybe we can
I think
have
so.
some standard of what we mean by pure altruism. I mean, it can be arbitrary, but the idea is, okay, yeah, some sort of purely other regarding activity.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely no personal
I
benefit.
remember I remember last time we were moving back and forth on what the heck we even meant by altruism, so maybe trying to make progress there. Ian, did you have some thoughts? Or
There was a line um, about midway through that maybe kind of touches on Jason's point. Um, I'm going to do my best to remember, but it said something like, more philosophers have come to terms with the idea that even if you end up getting some sort of benefit out of an act, it doesn't mean that you went into the act with that benefit in mind. Um,
Mhm.
they said it much more legitimately than that. And that was something I hadn't necessarily thought about because I think I was kind of thinking along with Jason's lines. I was like, where is that benefit? Where is that benefit? Um, Now, in Penny Lane's case, maybe the benefit was kind of there all along. Like maybe that was part of the scheming. That was part of the plan. Um, but I don't know if that's true for all cases. And if there is like say some sort of emotional gratification, the sense of doing good, right? I think that's what that line was getting to of that feeling of doing good. Uh, e- that doesn't necessarily offset the good intention. Like you weren't going into it with that feeling, and that's definitely an area I don't know a lot about, but I'm definitely interested to learn more. So if you have any like background suggested readings there, Josh, I'd definitely love to dig into that side of moral philosophy.
Yeah, I'll say two things. One, I mean, it's just as a suggested reading before I forget it. There's a guy, Nagel, who has this book on called The Possibility of Altruism, and that's like it's difficult and complex philosophy. I'm not an expert in that field, but it's very difficult, but brilliant guy. So Nagel, Possibility of Altruism might be a thing to explore in that avenue. Um, but I think on the general point, yeah, I think well, first of all, I'll admit I had the same sort of. I almost my heart dropped a little bit when she mentioned the film, and I was like, ah, dang it all, you know. And I think that maybe is a little bit irrational. I feel like some of this I'm gonna error theory, so like, what's the real motivation for this? I think socially, right, we have this instinct to be critical and skeptical of people, and I think it probably makes sense for all sorts of reasons. And so the fact that she has some benefit that we can see coming from this does make me much more skeptical, right? That what she was doing is the sort of something close to pure altruism. Um, I do think there's a way in which, at least if I'm like really pushed on it, I don't think it's wrong to derive a benefit from something like that. It feels like we could separate it in the way that Ian, you're gesturing at this idea that like there could be a ton of causes for my action, right? Um, and if the question is like, okay, was my intention to help other people, and then later on I can get some benefit, I feel good about helping other people. Okay, that feels very different than my intention was to benefit myself by helping other people, right? Like both of those actually I would say are good. Like it's social system, objective perspective. Yeah, I want people helping other people, and the motivations maybe are less important. But if I'm judging individual character or something, there does seem something importantly different between helping other people because I care about them versus helping them because I think it gets back to me. And so that's where I definitely think there's a distinction. Um, I think that the claim, and this is where I'm getting back to what you're saying, Ian, is it seems possible, right, at least in principle, that someone could get a benefit from doing something, but their real intention, their real motivation really is helping other people. And so I don't know the timeline for when Penny Lane thought of this book or this movie idea, right, or whatever. Maybe she's like did something good, and I was like, actually, why not write about my life? A lot of filmmakers, a lot of artists, they discuss or draw on their experience, and so maybe that's like the thing. But I will admit, like, given that I've lived in the world and you have these interactions with people, I don't know if the scales of what I think is likely the case. I'm much more like, yeah, I think she's probably thinking about herself in a way that was more, maybe even wasn't intentional to her, but she could see a benefit from this behavior, and that does seem to dilute the pure altruistic nature of it, of the thing. Um, yeah, so that was a bit of a summary, but I don't know if that like I'm reporting I felt similarly, Jason. It was like, and then I'm like, it kind of makes some sense.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about one of those final discussions the podcast host had talking about apes evolving
Yeah.
to encourage altruistic behaviors in others, but not requiring it for themselves. And
Yeah.
kind of the podcast host's idea that we're actually a hypocritical species, that we are encouraging people to behave like
Yeah.
this, and maybe how that relates, right? Was Penny simply a part of the system that encourages the donation, and because
Mm-hmm.
she learned and was able to rationalize this behavior? I'm curious y'all's thoughts on that too. Like, I think one of the maybe interest core questions maybe we can still discuss is like, is that altruistic behavior innate in us, or
Mm.
is it the product of influence of something from experience or wisdom? Um, it feels like there's still possibly the chance it's like in our DNA somehow, right? In
Yeah.
this the genes stuff, but perhaps it's more socially constructed than we realize. I'm here interested. But before I say that
Yeah.
too, this podcast reminded me. I don't really remember where I learned it, but I'm sharing it in the chat. Like the 8 levels of charity, and I'm sending it in 2 parts. And one of like the highest levels of charity one can give is giving without knowing the recipient and the recipient not knowing the donor. And this idea that the anonymous donation is one of the most like sincere forms of charity. And so definitely Penny was doing a type, maybe arguably doing the last one where it says enabling the recipient to become self-reliant, like helping someone live their life. And 7. So she really did one of the best things you can do for another human, it seems. So it's hard to discredit her actions because maybe self-interest, right? I think is the point. But yeah, I just wanted to share this. I feel like there might be another rephrasing of the level of charity, but in my quick Googling, this is what I could find. Anyway, so yeah, a broad theme, but curious what you want to talk about.
Thanks for sharing that. Honestly, I've never Maimonides I've heard of, but I've never seen this 8 levels of charity thing. And now I'm just scanning the list. I'm like, okay, this sort of distinction making is helpful. And I'm also curious about that 8th, enabling the recipient to become self-reliant. There's something interesting about that. It does seem different than 7. Also, I'm putting in the scope of this sort of Kantian, consequentialist, utilitarian stuff. And he's pre-Kantian, so this is interesting that the self-reliance thing is present there. Yeah, I wanted to draw back. So the thing that the host was talking about. So essentially, there's this hypocrisy explanation. So the idea is, it's not like human beings are altruistic. It's that it's good for a human species to praise folks who behave altruistically, while simultaneously for the individual to not behave altruistically, because that's going to promote their well-being and so forth. And so that was like one of the sort of explanations for what's going on here is like, how did altruistic behavior or behavior that seems altruistic show up in human beings? Or maybe something like this. And then I just wanted to flag, and this is maybe a discussion we can put in tensions. It seemed like, I think it was Satya, so Kiran Satya, the philosopher guy, he wanted to offer not explicitly a contradiction, like an objection to this, but like an alternative where I think his thinking was right that like humans value or see value in altruistic endeavors, and that's supposed to be a distinct thing. So there's like all sorts of weird things. And this is where they're talking about like the circus performer, what's his name, David Blaine or whoever, doing so humans do all kinds of weird things. So it's not that surprising that one of the things they do is altruism. But then I think Satya's idea is that there's something reasonable. I mean, we didn't read the book, but something reasonable about these altruistic values, and that's like it's supposed to be an explanation for that is different than I think the hypocrisy explanation. So we might have altruism in both cases, but he's thinking of something reasonable or good about these outcomes, and that if we're reasoning, we can come to accept that even in the non-hypocritical manner. I think that's an elaboration of his idea, I should say, because I don't think they said that in the essay. But anyways, the hypocrisy explanation is this one that, yeah, we just want other people to do good, and so we pretend we're altruistic, and then for ourselves, maybe not. I don't know. So that was only summary. I didn't actually have a contributory point or like a discussion advancing. Ian, did you have thoughts, or Jason, did you want to re-identify a point of discussion? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm being heavy-handed here in my moderating. I'm gonna step back. There's 3 of us and we know each other, so
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so this isn't a major contribution, but I will say when I was listening to that section about hypocrisy, um, it got me thinking like, oh man, what would George Price from our last talk, what would he think about all this? And that would probably cause him to spiral. And incidentally, I did just pick up there's a book about him. It's called The Price of Altruism. It's kind of a biography and references to altruism stuff like that. So I'm gonna start reading that soon. But yeah, interesting. Kicked off a new interest in me. Never heard of him.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought him up again because yeah, he's someone that struggled with that hypocrisy part. And I think that's really the contention actually is we are placing way too much emphasis about the concern for hypocrisy. I would argue we also live in a society that wants to reward good behavior actively. I mean, this is like a technique parents use to like reward their children to act well. We expect good actions to be rewarded financially, spiritually, physically. What really is the issue with us rewarding ourselves? Maybe it is an interesting part of this too. It feels we clearly can't live in a society without a reward structure of some type. I think even if you were to take away physical like rewards, and it's just praise and like psychological rewards. So yeah, I think for me that's my takeaway from this last like 2 weeks is you know, when observing someone that maybe you think could be acting hypocritically, for example, I could picture I've had, you know, family members actually that have asked for money, for example, and I've given them money and they promise to pay me back, and I have never been paid back, and I continue to enable that kind of behavior. I've since stopped because it's gotten too far, honestly, right? I received no reward, right, for doing this action. Not note a thank you, not any note of how my money has helped that person. Um, so one may argue I was trying to do number 8 on this list of enabling someone to become self-reliant. But maybe I'm actually doing number 2, where I was giving cheerfully but inadequately. And I guess my point I'm trying to bring up is about like I am maybe supporting a hypocritical person that is expecting altruistic behavior because I'm a family member. Versus and so I'm a part in that Penny Lane camp of I'm being tricked by the system that, you know, altruism is not a true construct like biologically, but it's just a social construct, and that we really all truthfully can act as hypocritically as we want and that be okay in a way. I feel like you can go, I guess I'm trying to argue both sides, like the a world where hypocrisy is okay and a world where it's not, and it's probably something between both of those. Um, so, but yeah, I feel like I'm still working on how to resolve that thought about our humans, by our nature, like okay with being hypocritical, to the detriment of others. I'm not sure I think that's a case by case, probably the question. Everyone has their own values and morals, right? That's kind of the point about why there's ethical discussions is what will we tolerate, like the behavior of other people. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, anything?
Ian, did you just
Yeah.
Maybe there was another section in the earlier in the podcast when she was talking about how people react to her, and I was able to kind of like unite this in my head with the hypocrisy theory later on, because she was saying that people immediately, uh, well, you know, some subset of people will immediately start getting defensive, and I kind of was able to unite that with the hypocrisy theory because it's like, okay, not only are they okay with her doing it, but they're so against themselves doing it that their immediate reaction is defensiveness, right? So it's here's this thing where we praise it in others, but we be because it benefits us or the whole, but it's not necessarily something that we want to jump into. And she said that people immediately start getting defensive and start explaining reasons why they can't, whether they're, you know, well justified reasons or not, that you start rationalizing.
I think I don't know if I have an instinct for just never being that moved by the pessimistic version of these discussions. But so the thing is, it feels like I understand how the hypocrisy could be possible. Like that's the thing, and I know certainly some, not probably tiny fraction of human beings are hypocritical in some sense, so acting like they want people to be good and they're not. You know, if you've ever met someone who's like narcissistic or that sort of thing, or God forbid, been in friendships or relationships with these people, you know this thing happens, but it feels to me like it's another step to conclude that these people are like in some sense conscious or like aware of that. It feels like often they're like they don't realize that they're being self-centered. They don't realize or they don't seem to believe that the whole world is out to get them and that they're the victims all the time. Like there's like, and so the fact that like my actual interactions with these people, now this is anecdotal, is that these people seem not to be aware of how selfish they are, or not to be aware of how much take they're getting, or how much they're taking and how little they're giving, suggesting that there's like some, for me, for the hypocrisy to be really like, it has to be like conniving in a deep dark room. Like I know my thing and I've tricked everybody in this. And I know that happens. I'm not saying that never happens, but like again, David Blaine stands on the tightrope for 40 hours. There's a lot of weird things or atypical things, and that doesn't, it's just we're creatures that are we're able to be so many things, right? Where I was going with this is that like what does seem plausible and seems really easy to understand is that we want to surround ourselves with people who are good, right? So that's that evolutionary thing that I was discussing earlier. Like people who give kidneys are good people to be around. And so with that, it seems like, well, actually, I think that's probably true. And actually, I think that's probably true, not just for evolutionary reasons. I just think like when I conceive of what I think is good in the world, I don't know, pleasure, what's bad, pain, more pleasure, less pain is good. And having people give kidneys or, helping that way, or having people who are generous helps in that way, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm trying to preempt an objection. Even the hypocrisy, I mean, sorry, the sort of, but what about the sort of the reactions that Penny Lane's getting where people are like trying to defend themselves? For me, that kind of fits. That's like a natural response for someone who also seems to think there's like, you're under pressure. You kind of think, yeah, that she's given that or done that is good. And now I'm trying to make excuses for myself. I think this is what we're supposed to learn. When people get ultra defensive, it's like you've put them off. And honestly, as an aside, I was involved with animal rights stuff. And so before graduate school, I did this summer where I was like, paying people to watch these videos and talk about animal agriculture. And some people were extremely defensive and all these like objections and so forth. And I always just felt like those are the people who clearly are being moved by this. The folks who are like, oh, thanks, and like left, or just like, let me have them. They aren't moved by the argument. And so this defensiveness or that instinct for defensiveness seems to me to be evidence that they're seeing something that I'm also seeing, or that they're seeing something that Penny's also saw. Like, look, wow, it's really good that you did that. I need to have some explanation for why I haven't done that. And so I wouldn't need that explanation if I didn't give a shit about it, or if I didn't think there was something good. It seems like that's easier for me to understand than like the reason they're being defensive, or the reason people are like coming up with these excuses is that like they're against altruism or something. Like it I don't know. I don't know if I'm babbling a little bit,
Well,
but
for
it kind
me,
of feels like,
yeah, the
yeah.
takeaway you're saying is the defensiveness is coming from the need to prove you are not a hypocrite, which I think
Mm-hmm.
we may have like an innate sense of
Yeah.
be in a social group, not being seen as hypocrites. It's like so importantly. So that's why maybe Penny, everyone is moved, like you said. I really like you said that people that defend themselves are actually in fact moved by those arguments. And I think part of this podcast was talking about how we developed reasoning, right? And we need things to be logical and to make sense. And I mean, could you live at some point you do have to answer that question. Well, why have I not given a kidney? Maybe that's a question we can all three of us like are any of us compelled to want to donate a kidney? I felt uncompelled, but I frankly am not sure I have a great reason why I would not. Does that make me hypocritical? I'm unsure of, because I guess it depends on what are the expectations. And if you look on the website for today's talk, like the final question said, is altruism of some degree an obligation? Um, and so I think people, when talking with Penny and feeling that defensiveness, they're like, am I obligated to give a kidney because Penny, my friend Penny, did it out of the kindness of her heart? Like, is that what it means to be a person today? So yeah, I'm interested to go that route, right? Because you I think are talking about when we think about hypocrisy and good people not wanting to feel hypocritical, um, maybe it has something to do with that sense of the obligation to do the right thing. Um, I guess I would wonder if we think as a as a people, is there actually an obligation to be altruistic, or can we be always the selfish ape? Joshua, you brought up the narcissism, right? Is like maybe people like are incapable actually of um, altruism, and just biologically speaking. So I don't know. Maybe narcissism is a sign of that altruism is in fact like a type of something in our DNA and our makeup. That curious if that stirs any thoughts in anyone. Also, hello, Marcus. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome, Marcus. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to be interrupt too much, but yes, I'm
No.
just listening, and thank you for letting me be here with you all today.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, Ian or Marcus, I guess. Do either of you have thoughts? I have some thoughts on Jason stuff, but I'm trying to bite my tongue a little more today.
I have thoughts, but I also kind of want to listen one more round.
Sure, sure. Well, so yeah, honestly, I don't know if this is going on. I'm actually not certain that this is exactly what you're saying, Jason. But yeah, it feels like I'm gonna go farther. I'm gonna make a claim that's totally not justified. The narcissistic stuff, it seems like that makes sense that like we have a very deep discomfort maybe with like being a hypocrite, or a deep discomfort with not, doing this reciprocal give and take thing, right? So why do these narcissistic people seem to conceive like they really think they are the victims, or they really are conceiving of like all this taking as not just them always taking and giving? It's like, well, because the alternative is they have to admit something that presumably they're uncomfortable admitting, which is like, yeah, we ought to give and take. And now I know, I'll period on that. I'm already thinking of this problem, just like, well, okay, there's also, we're living in social communities, and so yeah, we do need to, you don't want to be seen as the hypocrite, you don't want to be seen as a selfish person. So there's all this like peer pressure and things that also like could explain that behavior. But the optimist in me thinks, well, maybe what's going on is something like what Seti was saying. There is like some sort of, well, he didn't say there wasn't a hypocritic thing, but I mean, there's some sort of incentives we have or interest we have in not being hypocritical, or, and I think this is distinct, some sort of interest, like strong interest we have in like recognizing altruistic value in some way.
Yeah. I want to harp, Josh, on that point you said of that sense, like we don't want to be seen as hypocritical. Is that actually where the obligation feeling comes from? Is peer pressure and social pressure? Is social pressure the only reason people try to act properly? Like, you could imagine too, like growing up being raised in some house with some rules. You can't act however you want, like only selfishly, lest you be reprimanded by your parents, for example. So maybe like we're raised this way to avoid negative feelings and opinions. Um, it feels like that's maybe on a different spectrum than Penny. It feels like Penny didn't. No one really was like telling Penny to do any of this. Why does she go? So there's the cases of people going so far above and beyond the call to duty, so to speak, and then there's people that have to be like dragged to do the right thing or shamed into doing the right thing. So I wonder if on that lower level or this end of the spectrum, is social pressure the only reason people may feel compelled to donate to causes? Like maybe we've all had a friend that's fundraising for something, for example, and they're like, can you give me like $5? I'm doing a ice bucket challenge, or I'm doing Relay for Life. And you're like, oh, okay, you're my friend. I don't want to feel bad that I said no to you, even though I actually don't care about XYZ thing, but maybe I should. And then I go through that rationalization exercise. So yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, for me, that's what my takeaway from Josh's point was, that peer pressure and social pressure to do good is as strong a driving force as anything else, perhaps. And I wonder if that is the root driving force, that we are social creatures that need to have like social order, and like cohesion, and not this like a state where we're constantly in conflict would not be good for anyone. So yeah.
But I mean, it feels to me like, okay, even at the social pressure thing, like one possibility, yes, is that the social pressure is like motivated maybe by that hypocrisy explanation. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the podcast, Marcus. So the hypocrisy thing, where it's just this like, we want others to be good and we want to be selfish. Okay, that is a possible explanation, and so that's like maybe a source of the peer pressure. But it feels to me like another source of it is we want people to be good because we think being good is like a good or choice-worthy thing. And in some sense, I'm kind of like, isn't it quite easy to get away with doing the bad things? Like, yeah, I can't get away with robbing a bank, but I can get away with all these little tiny bad things so regularly. And even like, there's a way in which I think in general people don't like this, but like, I don't know, if you look at the heroes, or not the heroes, the powerful people in the world. It seems like we have a lot of evidence that bad people can get away with being bad and that sort of stuff, and yet there's this pressure. And so I'm just feeling like there's another explanation, just is that the peer pressure is because we want people to do good or do the right thing and so forth. And so it feels like it's not enough for me to see that peer pressure is a big motivating thing. Because what's the explanation for that peer pressure? Is it like some sort of social or community wide or individual wide individual that grows up in community interest in the thing? That seems like a possibility too. And in some sense, it seems like an easier possibility to imagine rather than that like everybody's secretly scheming and even like I don't know. Does it feel like when you're being hypocritical? I'm just gonna period. For me, and this is just interesting. I don't know. Yes, I know I'm hypocritical sometimes and selfish and so forth, but it doesn't feel to me like it's like I'm trying to trick myself almost or something into thinking I really am guilty, rather than like I don't give a shit. I'm just guilty because I don't know. I don't know if any of that yapping makes sense, but no need to pick up on what I've just said, of course.
I was gonna say I'm kind of going in different areas with it, but I think what I kind of come back to is the idea of chaos and order. It's like I think we just typically follow the norm that we've either been groomed to understanding as far as altruism and morality and whatnot, just because it creates more of a standard definitive line of order and community as opposed to like a chaotic world. I know a lot of individuals have brought up the movie, I think it's Idiocracy, just to kind of explain like what the nation can become. And I think just that idea that that selfish nature of everyone kind of jumping on that bandwagon and seeing that, hey, what's in it for me, or why altruism doesn't really get you anywhere. You start to see if everyone starts to feel that way, then we're basically deteriorating very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the motivator to avoid that. So some individuals, they'll slip up. I think it's just kind of on that that pendulum, or maybe it's just a kind of the slider scales. Like,
Mhm.
well, the selfishness is, it's a little bit past the good, but it's not horrible. Um, I think I connected with the altruism and the donor organ donation, mostly just because my parent was a recipient of an organ donation. They received a double lung transplant, but that donor, which is a really heavy um, procedure to go through, but for them to receive that was such a blessing to my family, and I'm thankful for that person. But it caused them their life, that they had to go through, that their parents or their family experienced such a loss. But my family had such a gain. One of my best friends donated one of their organs, kidney, to their sister. So I think there's like that close tie that allows us to be, altruistic, just because there's such a deeper connection there. But when you start to put those other storylines into the large scheme effect where you're saying, okay, altruism just to be a neighborly fellow, on the street, I think has a different dynamic, and there's a different motivation or push in order to get someone to that area. It is curious though.
Yeah.
So Marcus, was the double lung donor a living donor, you said, or
No,
was
no,
that
no, sorry.
someone,
The way I
okay,
said it, I realized it did not make sense. No, they were
someone that
deceased
had
on the
passed?
scene. I
But
was like, that's a crazy level
I
of
was like,
altruism
damn, why didn't they
I
interview
there.
was like,
people? I guess.
that takes the
Yeah.
Penny Lane
No.
thing to the next level, like sacrificing your life for someone
I don't
that
know. I
would
was
be
like, you know
like,
what? As I'm saying this, I'm like, I know how this sounds. That's not exactly what I'm
okay,
trying to say.
I was gonna be mind
But
blown.
no, they died on the scene in a motorcycle accident.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's that little thing in your driver's license.
Yeah,
Or
honestly.
organ donor.
That was actually the reason why I ended up doing it too. Making sure I made that marker on my donating
Yeah.
on my ID, just because like at that point in your life, like if you can give to help someone else, I don't want to be cliche or
Yeah.
weird to say if you could give to help someone else live, I think it's a beautiful gift. But I also am not sure on the level of altruism, like where that kind of lands, because like usually when you feel altruistic, you kind of get that kickback, you feel it almost immediately. But like if you're, of course, deceased, how do you feel that? I guess knowing as you're going is kind of, I feel like I'm rhyming too much, but I'm not unintentionally. But I feel like knowing as you're like leaving this, this realm or wherever
Yeah.
you're headed,
In the
knowing that you
podcast,
left
Mark,
that behind.
it said that there's like a calculus to deciding what level of sacrifice you would tolerate in order to behave altruistically. So, in the case for Penny Lane and her organ donation, she was like, the amount of pain and suffering that I would have felt was on a different scale of magnitude lower than those people that have to suffer on dialysis and may never have a normal life again. So for her, it was the math and that disparity and that inequality was so easy. So maybe in the case for people that choose to be organ donors, and the driver's license stuff is like, you're already dead. What is the sacrifice? Some people may not want to do this for religious reasons. For example, you want to die with your whole body intact. So that would be against that sacrifice is far too much for whatever may happen in the afterlife. But for others that don't subscribe to that, it's like maybe that's totally it's why would I not do it? Why do I care if I am buried without both my lungs or something? It's sort of interesting. So I think that's where the level of altruism and the level of sacrifice like come into play. What does that math require?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, of course, I think, right, it's a less of a demanding thing to do, but I do feel like going back to an earlier point, now I feel like I'm harping on an argument. The idea of opting in to donate, right, when it has seemingly no benefit for you. I guess one possibility is you can get some benefit now, like, okay, I feel like I'm doing something in the future. That would be thing. But it feels like, again, it's a recognition that there's something good out there, namely that like these organs can do good and that matters to me, even if I'm not there to feel it later. Now, I guess that's compensated by if I feel really good about it now or whatever. But I think like the general thought, and it keeps coming back to me, is like when I'm teaching utilitarianism, and for those who don't know, it's just this idea that we maximize certain outcomes to utility. One of the arguments, right, is that pain wherever it shows up is bad and pleasure wherever it shows up is good. Actually, it's not even an argument. It's like a baseline assumption of the view that doesn't get a lot of defense there. But like it seems to me that there is something obvious about that. Like it does seem true. And I also there's this guy Shanti Deva who's like this medieval Buddhist philosopher, and he has this whole idea like, there's pain wherever it shows up. And if you're familiar with Buddhism, maybe it's plausible enough. Pain wherever it shows up is bad, and so it seems like kind of obvious, like that's a recognition that we have, and it seems like that's not something that can be, I feel like, explained away by like evolutionary theory. Like, why should I think pain anywhere is bad? In fact, thinking pain is bad is in some sense going to be a thing I have to overcome if I'm trying to kill and eat to survive, or I'm trying to kill to survive again, my neighboring tribes and things. So it is like, it does seem like actually a barrier in some sense. But given, and I think this maybe goes to the Satya point in some way, like given the reasonable, rational nature of human beings, we are able, like it does seem some sense like, okay, yeah, pain is bad wherever it shows up. And so that feels like it is going to give us some sort of support for this idea that I ought to behave altruistically. And so I feel like almost the explanation, I get it from evolutionary theory and stuff, but the explanation for why we don't behave altruistically feels like the one that needs to be explained, given, I don't know, sort of, for me, a sort of dispassionate third party perspective of what pain is, or what pleasure is, or what an organ is to a living human being, or, blah, 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 blah thing.
I think it relates to that sacrifice math to someone. What level of sacrifice will you tolerate? For example, personally, in the last 2 months, I've like trying to go vegan. I never thought I would do this, and I'm willing to sacrifice eating meat, which and I've had plenty of vegan friends, vegetarian friends over the years. Um, and I've heard their compelling arguments, but it never compelled me enough, the benefit. And until I learned a lot about the detriments and that pain, and that I couldn't with on my conscious like continue to behave a certain way. So for me, the sacrifice that I'm making is resolving this tension of the world we live in with. For me, I went way too deep into like learning about factory farming specifically, and that's actually what
Big
I
mistake.
yeah. I don't necessarily actually oppose like the eating of meat, but I oppose the treatment of how we obtain the meat. And my point, I guess I'm bringing it up just as a point about why do people not, why isn't everyone a vegan? Don't we all care about animals? Well, at some point you have to figure out, when does that scale shift from like comfort to discomfort? And I was in a severe state of discomfort that I had to reconcile. And so maybe altruistic behavior comes from this sense that the scale is imbalanced. In the last podcast, all those hero stories we listened to where people were risking their lives almost stupidly to save people, like the man that jumped into the subway and landed on the person. He didn't even seem like he was helping that person, honestly, in
Yeah.
my opinion. I think he's just making it more dangerous. If you may remember, like someone
Yeah, he had to lay
fainted,
out.
it was in the track, unconscious. He's like, I'm gonna go try to save that man as a subway train comes. I don't know what he was thinking, but he said gets awarded for this. To him, it's like he wasn't even thinking that it was a sacrifice. Like his level of discomfort of seeing a human in danger was enough to compel him. So there was no, he said he didn't, some of the heroes were like, I didn't think once about my life being in danger. I just felt immense compulsion to
Mhm.
help. And I think that's similar to how we choose to do what's good or bad, like when we donate to things or have different causes. Often, people may donate to the American, like to cancer research, or like I did stuff with ALS because I had a family member who died from ALS, and so I chose that cause because I feel uncomfortable with the thought that this disease has no cure and that people suffer from it. Not because I think it's a good thing, but because
Mm.
so I feel like maybe altruism, in fact, by definition, has to be self-involved. I think for
Mhm.
Penny, she ended up learning people immensely suffer from like dialysis in that life, and therefore, and if her sacrifice is so small, why would you not do that? So
Mhm.
to me, I feel like that's where I'm landing. That it's in radical altruism isn't true. Actually, I think it's the complete opposite. That we only genuinely can act altruistically when we feel compelled. There we go.
Mhm.
A compulsion to act. So yeah, that's the end of my rant. I'm curious if y'all agree or have any contrarian points there.
I don't think I have a contrarian point, but you made me think about something even just on the vegan side. I think sometimes indifference or just um, the occasional, like, well, I'm not necessarily thinking about the animals or the treatment of animals as I'm eating meat, but sometimes I just get so bored with just eating meat that I, take a step back or reduce it in my diet so much that it's like, okay, and now I'm just eating a lot more vegetables or fruits or starches and things like that to kind of help me. And then I'm also adopting things that, vegan friendly meals just because, I mean, there's great ways to make them taste good. I think about that even with the type of altruistic viewpoint that or the selfishness that maybe that we want to ascribe to have a good identity, but sometimes the things that we're doing naturally or things that we're doing because we're kind of indifferent to the plight or the struggle of what the larger meaning is, how that also wavers into the conversation. It's like, is there something to be said that like, oh, like, even though I don't know anyone who has suffered or lived with ALS. Um, I have this extra $50 from, doing this thing. I can donate. Here you go. Or I contribute to a bake sale that's just for this. I'm kind of getting something out of it, but it's a big deal on that end. I wonder how that looks. Or if it's looked differently, I guess.
I don't know if you were here when I mentioned it earlier too, when that friend asks you, will you donate to my cause that has nothing to do with you, but is important to you?
Yeah.
And they're a friend of yours, or at least a close, it's almost easier to do that than to handle the case of figuring out a way to say no. And usually it's a small enough. I would pay you $10 to get out of this conversation, actually. But we rationalize it like, of course, yeah, I'm helping a good cause. It's my close friend. Like, this is all good behavior. But is there really like this kernel of, if you take my analogy about there's a scale of how much are you willing to sacrifice to overcome a personal discomfort? Maybe that amount is a number between $10 and $20. And if you could, for a fundraiser, and you can learn what that number is for a lot of close people, maybe that's enough. So I think that's so you reminded me like the bake sale, right? I wonder if that's, I still feel pretty confident in my scale analogy here, being that the description of how to handle most altruistic behavior decision making.
I'm gonna try something to put pressure on the scale and like overcoming personal discomfort. I hear that, right? So like, oh, okay, I just don't want to disappoint my friend, or I don't want to make this stranger feel like I'm not charitable, or whatever the thing is, or like I don't want to see this animal suffer, and that's what, like, because I'm gonna feel uncomfortable with it, right? I see how this definitely makes it seem less altruistic, but on the other hand, I'm thinking, well, what sort of person doesn't want to see the animal suffer, or doesn't want to make this stranger think they're uncharitable, or doesn't want to disappoint a friend? Now, yes, I can see the conception where it's like they're paying 70 chess and they're actually deeply selfish and they're trying to manipulate their friend into thinking they're similarly altruistic to keep the friendship. Or I can see a much simpler explanation where they're like, it is something like I'm uncomfortable with animal suffering, and so that's why I want to save the puppy. And that just seems like the right assessment of what's at stake here. Or I'm uncomfortable with ALS. And now, yes, of course, I could be uncomfortable with 100 diseases, and there's a million causes I could give to. And this is just one instance of the many things I could be uncomfortable with. But it feels like there's like a simple explanation, which is just like, I'm recognizing something that's true, that, I don't know, pain is bad in this case. That doesn't, I'm not saying this explains all the cases, but it seems like there's a simple explanation where often just seems like I'm the right sort of person. I'm recognizing the way the world is, or I'm recognizing blah, blah, blah. Now, I think this is, I want to just undermine my case. I also do know the situation. I'm like someone who's so freaking particular about things, right? Like that I don't want to donate to Ian's charity because I think the organization I have in mind is a better and more effective one. And so I might give to Ian's just because, okay, whatever, it's $10. But I'm really not in that instance doing it because I think it's the right thing to do for the charity. I'm doing it because of my friendship with Ian or something. And so I guess there is something still true where it's like my discomfort, but I think some of these discomfort cases, I shouldn't say a lot, some at least feels like they can be explained away by like, well, that's the sort of person that recognizes the way the world is. And using my utilitarian worldview, right, where pain is bad and pleasure is good, they're recognizing facts essentially. And so, yeah, overcoming discomfort, not wanting to like fail to recognize the things you know to be true, that pain is bad. Yeah, it's overcoming discomfort, but it's like overcoming discomfort with making a mistake here, or it's overcoming a discomfort with being a hypocrite, or blah blah blah. Like it's, oh, sorry, with not being a hypocrite. I don't know how to phrase that right. Like you don't want to be a hypocrite. You want to see the world as it is. You want to think pain is bad, and so like the discomfort there is just like, it doesn't seem insidious for me, if that makes sense, or sinister.
Yeah,
Not always. I have like 15 counter examples in my head, but I'm trying to.
Josh, I'm so glad you framed it that way because at one point Penny Lane, she said that it's such a, I think she said, isolating feeling to walk down the street and know that you have like such a different moral compass than everyone. And my initial reaction was like, oh, yeah, I think I have a great moral compass. I can understand that. But then, like what you just said, wait a minute, no, who wants suffering, right? Like who sees these issues or who sees suffering and says, oh, this is fine. So I feel like the moral compass is maybe not the full explanation. Um, But then as I was listening, I paused and I thought back to, uh, what was it, last week? Maeve McCowan came in for the Ethically Speaking season series.
Yeah.
And she was talking, this was about justice, systemic injustices, and where does responsibility lie? Is it more on the individual, or is it on a bigger picture? Like when we see suffering, do we take it on personally, or do we take it as it's something out of our control? So where was I going? So altruism, in that sense, you could say maybe it has something to do with someone's moral compass, but I still think that's too simplistic because most people's moral compass would not explain the low percentage of people who are actively involved in name and cause animal rights, kidney, spontaneous kidney donation. So it's probably this balance between feeling like you should do something, feeling like you can do something. I had some
Yeah.
help with this. I should have written down notes this morning. Feel free to jump in there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like I have this thing, and I'm routinely by very smart people that disagree with me and seem to think I'm wrong. But like, it just feels to me like even yeah. So not everybody's doing animal rights or help the poor or whatever the things are. But like, if I'm trying to imagine the perspective of other people about things, it feels like they often have something in mind that they think is important. So they're doing something for their family, or they're doing something for this thing or that thing. And yeah, maybe I, from a different perspective, think they should be doing other things, right? But even like, I come from my family's mega conservative. They have all these horrible views. They get all sorts of facts wrong, right? But like, having been raised by them and loved by them, like, I don't think that they're like consciously evil. I just think they're making some stupid mistakes, and then that's like leading them down these wrong paths. And it feels like, from their perspective, these things that look to me like, oh my God, what is wrong with you people? How deeply evil are you? That's like, well, they're thinking, their conception of what's good is wrong, and so they're making a mistake from my perspective. But like, it feels like yeah, I'm just less. I often this is this old idea from Socrates that everyone acts under what's called the guise of the good. So we're always trying to do something that we conceive of as good. So there's not like, even the devil is trying to do good by the devil's lights, is this idea. Almost everyone I talk to says this is wrong. I feel like, I don't know, something, it's hard for me to conceive of it, that being wrong. It feels like it's hard for me to conceive of, like, I think this is bad, and so I understand good and bad in some sense. I think this is bad, and I'm still doing it. Now, this is probably a failure of imagination, but that's the kind of feeling I have. And so this is what, given I have this thought, it makes me really easy for me to like come up with excuses for why, like, I talk to this person about this issue I care about, and they don't respond as I would want them to. Well, they have all these other things. And then if I complicate that even further by the fact that we're all like, so many of us are living in situations of precarity, and we're at risk, and we have all these fears, and we are clearly very fear-based creatures. I am myself. It's almost like the idea that people are escaping this fear and nervousness about the future to do things that are help other people seems exceptional. Not exceptional because it's not like a natural thing for us, but exceptional because, like, think of all the things you have to overcome, to do something for some other people. I don't know.
Josh, I lost that maybe the nugget.
Yeah.
What is the insidious idea or bad
Well,
thing? Clear. Like, I lost that.
Yeah, so that it feels like one conception of why, I talk to somebody about some issue I care about and they don't do the thing is that they're just evil, or they're like bad, or they don't care about others and stuff like that. And that's really hard for me to imagine being the case. It's much easier for me to imagine, or make excuses maybe for them, depending on what you think here, that they have a different conception of what's good. The reason they're not moved by this animal welfare talk is they don't think animals feel things, or not, that sort of stuff. Or in a second, overwhelmed by fear.
Are you saying like you subscribe to the thought that everybody is acting in what they believe is for good? No one is genuinely acting for evil per se. We can all, it's kind of like the Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? He's like, I'm going to remove half of the universe so we have more resources. That's the net good, right? But the means to the end is where we disagree. But we actually all, is that what you're saying? And more people may actually are. So I shared this link. Maybe you all be interested too. There's this organization called Braver Angels, which whole purpose is to take people on opposite sides of the U.S. political spectrum and make teach them to like have this controversy with civility, but to also learn that the other side's rationality is not we're evil and we hate you. Like that we have more in common of this good. So I feel like there are other people that believe what you believe, Josh. I also believe that as well. What you said about that. Yes, everyone is, I think, acting the way they think is right. And I still think my scale analogy is helping me a lot still, that for depending on the issue at hand, though, what facts did you learn and how did you interpret the facts? You could have interpreted it from all sorts of different lenses, and clearly we have so many ways of interpreting events apparently in this country. And I think there's like a famous phrase too. There's like between a conversation between two people, there's like three sides to the story. Person A, person B, and the truth, right? And so I think when we are given these examples of what truth of some problem may be, we have this feeling to act. And I think you said the fear, and we also know this natural desire of like flight, fight, or there's a third one too, actually, I forget. Fight, flight, or something else. What is it, Ian? Do you remember? Freeze. There we go. Yeah, like a deer in the headlights, right? So, and that I think has to deal with your level of discomfort and that power that you feel. So some people realize I actually have talents that could help a larger societal problem. Maybe and I can start this foundation, and I've learned the skills. Like my sacrifice is nothing because I already have all the things I need. Why would I not do something that's so important? Whereas, I don't know, someone without any means may realize like my sacrifice would require me to get an education and to, I don't know, maybe earn a doctorate in a field, to like so much sacrifice before you can even make an impact. Maybe that's not worth it, even though we're all capable of making these same sacrifices. So I feel like the sacrifice math for the benefit math makes the most sense to me, and that we all in our own ways are deciding what the truths of an issue are and what the benefits of addressing it are, and have to agree on what benefits we actually value the most. I think is the problem. So, but yeah, I think Braver Angels, it kind of shows if you just begin to talk about it and to be curious about like the core reason, and if people are open to realizing your first interpretation may have been wrong. For example, maybe I learned all wrong things about factory farming and I was manipulated in some way. I don't necessarily know. I think I found valid sources of information, but I'm open to being wrong, I guess, personally. And I think that's important. And I think I've diverged away from altruism, but I think I really subscribe, Josh, to what you think. I don't think you're wrong at all in thinking that everyone can find a way to think they're acting good.
Cool. Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm realizing it's over the hour, and so I don't know if anyone has final things to say. I just want to mention next meeting is February 19th, and we'll talk about the effective altruism movement, which is like a group of people who think they have an idea of what we should be doing, and they're really focused on realizing certain consequences. And so it's going to be a good versus bad. So essentially, there's going to be some criticism of this movement, and I'll admit I'm a member, so to speak. There's not like a membership card, but I am moved by it. So I really would love some critiques and criticism. So that's February 19th, same time.